April 1st had rolled around, and Pitt was driving down a rugged dirt road, his exhaustion evident as he made his way to the family cabin he shared with his wife, Patricia. He'd just finished a 3-hour drive from his last teaching gig, and the cottage happened to be along the route back home. Patty was supposed to meet him there. The trip had taken longer than planned, and the sky had already dimmed. His new job as a traveling college instructor often kept him away from home, so he'd been eagerly anticipating this weekend. Patty, finally getting a rare break from her demanding nursing job, had planned to arrive the day before to stock the place with groceries and drinks. Patty was captivating. A slender yet athletic woman with striking brown eyes. Her nurse's uniform often turned heads, though she seemed unaware of the attention. Pitt had first crossed paths with her 7 years earlier during his brother Tom's college graduation. She was a newly enrolled nursing student attending the ceremony to support her friend Marcia, another graduate. Since Tom was dating Marcia, the four of them ended up having dinner together, and Pitt and Patty instantly clicked. Back then, Patty had been inexperienced when it came to closeness, and Pitt had been more than willing to guide her. Less than a year later, they were married. What truly drew Pitt to Patty, though, was her magnetic personality, warm, approachable, and effortlessly sociable. Lately, they'd been discussing the idea of starting a family and moving out of their cramped rental apartment. As Pitt navigated the final stretch of the winding road, he couldn't help but smile when the cabin finally came into view. But something was off. Patty's car was nowhere to be seen. He thought about calling her, but quickly remembered how unreliable cell service was in the mountains. With a sigh, he parked the car, grabbed his overnight bag, and walked up to the front door. It was locked, but he knew exactly where they kept the spare key. Inside, the cabin was cold and undisturbed, as if no one had been there for days. It was too late to safely drive back through the dark, twisting roads, so he figured he'd wait it out. Maybe he'd mixed up her arrival time. Then it hit him. Damn, he muttered. April Fool's Day. Every year, they tried to outdo each other with pranks. This had to be Patty's way of getting the upper hand. She was probably hiding somewhere nearby, ready to jump out and laugh at his confusion. He debated leaving, but decided to wait a little longer. Wandering into the kitchen, he frowned. No food, no drinks, nothing. If this was her idea of a joke, she'd taken it too far. Irritated, Pitt grabbed his bag and stepped outside, ready to head home. Just as he locked the door behind him, headlights appeared, winding their way down the dirt road. His annoyance eased. That had to be her. But as the car drew closer, Pitt realized it wasn't Patty. It was a blonde woman in a sleek red sports car, his brow furrowed. Did she seriously go this far for a prank? The car rolled to a stop and the driver's window slid down. A young woman leaned out, her voice smooth and self-assured. "You Pitt Avery?" she asked. Pitt chuckled, shaking his head. "Nice try, Patty. I know it's an April Fool's joke. Fine, I'll play along. Yeah, I'm Pitt." The blonde stepped out of the car, striking an almost theatrical pose. "I'm serious. I was hired to deliver this and make sure you read it." She handed him a sealed envelope. Pitt hesitated. The whole thing suddenly felt off, less like a prank and more like something real. With a knot forming in his stomach, he tore open the envelope and read, "Pitt, my love, first and foremost, I need you to know that I love you now more than ever. Our marriage has always been something I cherished, and I never once wanted to be with anyone else. I've had my share of admirers, but none ever tempted me, until recently. Thankfully, nothing happened. There's a new doctor at the university hospital. I developed a crush. It's nothing like love, just pure, maddening attraction. I realized the only way to clear my head was to confront it. He's married, with a little boy, and he's as committed to his family as I am to you. There's no future in this, only fleeting temptation. That's why I left town with him today. We'll spend the weekend together, get this foolishness out of my system, and I'll come home Sunday evening, refreshed and ready to move on. To keep things fair and prevent you from feeling abandoned or tempted to stray, I hired Chantel, an elite, no-strings-attached companion, to offer you the same experience I'm having. I couldn't bring myself to let her stay in our bed, so I chose the cabin. I'll be back by 6 p.m. Sunday, clean, clear-headed, and ready to put this behind us. We'll never speak of it again. I hope you'll understand why this was necessary. I believe our love is strong enough to survive this and carry us forward together. I love you, and only you. Patty. I won't have my phone, so don't bother trying to call or find me. Pitt's hands trembled as he reread the letter, heart racing. This wasn't a joke. It was real. You got a pen? The blonde asked casually, her faint smile unwavering. Pitt looked at her. Yeah, but I'm not signing anything. Not for me, she replied. You're supposed to confirm you got the letter. Without missing a beat, Pitt pulled a pen from his briefcase and scribbled his own note on the back of the letter. Delivered by Chantel, hired by Patricia Avery. Offer declined. The blonde's smile faltered. You sure? You're turning down quite the opportunity. She spun slowly, flaunting her toned figure and perfectly sculpted curves. Pitt barely glanced up. I'm sure. Drive safe, the roads get tricky at night. And don't tell my wife I said no, she might want her money back. Chantel laughed, shaking her head. Fair enough, but are you really certain? You seem like a decent guy. I could make this worth your while. Thanks, but no, Pitt replied, his gaze drifting to the darkening horizon. I've got enough on my mind already. She flashed her driver's license and signed the letter. Mind if I crash here tonight? Driving back on that dark road freaks me out, she asked. Pitt glanced at the name on her ID and considered the situation. All right, Sarah Davis. But let's be clear. No funny business. You'll sleep in the spare room. Try anything and you're out. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. Wow, that's a first. This is actually kind of cool. Pitt raised an eyebrow. Cool? Yeah, Sarah said with a shrug. I'm thinking about going full-time as an escort. My tuition's due next week and I'm graduating soon with a degree in textile engineering. Pitt's expression shifted from curiosity to mild surprise. Textile engineering? No kidding. A friend of mine runs a company that's hiring in that field. Once you graduate, shoot me your resume. I'll see if I can get you an interview. Her face lit up and she stepped forward as if to hug him, but Pitt held up a hand. Sorry, no contact. Later that evening, they shared some food and drinks from the 3 bags Patty had sent with her. Sitting by the warmth of the crackling fireplace, Pitt found himself opening up, recounting how he'd met Patty at his brother's college graduation. He spoke about their seemingly perfect relationship and how this weekend had shattered that illusion. Conversation flowed naturally, and the initial awkwardness faded. Sarah turned out to be an attentive listener, genuinely empathetic toward Pitt's heartbreak. He talked about their plans to start a family once Patty finished her master's in nursing, and how they dreamed of trading their cramped apartment for a real home. When Sarah noticed the sheen of tears in his eyes, she instinctively reached out, momentarily forgetting her promise to keep things platonic. Pitt tried to turn away, but when she touched his shoulder again, he didn't resist. The embrace was devoid of desire, just pure human comfort. Go ahead, she murmured. Let it out. And he did. Silent sobs shook his frame as he clung to her, the weight of betrayal pouring out. After what felt like an eternity, Pitt finally pulled back, wiping his face with the sleeve of his shirt. I'm still not going to sleep with you, he said, voice rough from emotion. Sarah gave a soft smile. I figured. That's what I respect about you. Now, can I tell you my story? Of course, Pitt nodded. We've got nothing but time. Leaning back, Sarah watched the fire flicker as she began. I grew up in a tiny mountain town in Kentucky. My dad worked in the coal mines and my mom took in laundry to make ends meet. School was my escape, but I had to start working at 12, cleaning houses, waitressing, anything to help out. She paused to take a sip of wine they'd found tucked away in the pantry. While other kids were going to dances and dating, I was pulling double shifts. I was skinny, flat-chested, and invisible to boys. Believe it or not, I went to college without ever having kissed anyone. Pitt blinked, caught off guard, but stayed silent. My scholarship was based on my math and science scores. It got me into a good school, but scholarships don't cover everything. I needed cash for books, rent, and a car, so I kept working. After my first year, my body changed. Suddenly, guys noticed me. Her expression darkened as she swirled the wine in her glass. I didn't know how to handle it. I trusted the wrong people, thought they cared about me, but they only wanted one thing. She sighed and took another sip. Then I met this guy who seemed different, didn't even try to kiss me until the 3rd date. I thought I'd finally found something real, but then Christmas break came, and he ghosted me. 10 straight days of silence. Pitt leaned forward. What happened when he came back? He called like nothing had happened, Sarah said bitterly. It took weeks, but I forgave him. We started sleeping together, and one night I told him I loved him. He just froze, said nothing. Pitt winced. What did he do next? He broke down, admitted he had a girlfriend back home, fiancé, actually. He'd proposed before leaving for college, claimed he was torn between us. Pitt chuckled dryly. Please tell me you kicked his A. Sarah grinned. Oh, I did, right there in the dining hall. It felt amazing. But after that, I stopped trusting people. Relationships seemed like traps. I needed money, and my roommate suggested escorting. Strictly platonic at first, just companionship. It paid well enough, but expenses kept piling up. Eventually, I expanded my services, hands only. I swore I'd never cross that line. Her smile faded as she set the glass down. Then your wife called, offered me $3,000 for this weekend. Said you were incredible in bed, that you were, well, above average. And now, here we are. Pitt shook his head, still grappling with the situation. If I'm that good, why would she even think about cheating? I asked her the same thing, Sarah admitted. She said it wasn't about love, just lust. The doctor really went out of his way to seduce her, and she felt like she had to scratch the itch to move on. Hiring me was her way of making it even. From what I gathered, the doctor probably footed most of the bill. Silence settled over them as they watched the embers smolder. After a while, Pitt draped an arm around her shoulders and kissed her forehead. Thanks. You turned the worst day of my life into something a little less awful. Sarah met his gaze, sincerity shining in her eyes. Your wife's a fool. Risking a man like you? That's not love. It's selfishness. If life were fair, I'd meet someone like you under different circumstances and start fresh. They hugged tightly, the warmth of shared vulnerability lulling them both into an exhausted sleep. The next morning, Sarah woke to the smell of sizzling bacon. Stretching with a sleepy groan, she rolled over to see Pitt standing at the stove, flipping eggs with practiced ease. Smells amazing, she murmured, rubbing her eyes. Pitt glanced over his shoulder and smiled. How do you like your eggs? Scrambled, she yawned. Like our lives right now. They both laughed, and Pitt plated the eggs with some toast, setting the table. Coffee's ready if you're interested. Definitely, Sarah replied, swinging her legs off the couch. But first, bathroom. I'm dying here. As she reached for the closet door, Pitt smirked. Wrong door, unless you're planning to pee on my hiking boots. Don't make me laugh, she gasped, legs crossed as she shuffled toward the right door. Second door on the right, he called after her. And while you're at it, ditch the makeup and let your hair down. Bet you look better that way. Sarah paused, hand on the doorknob, eyebrows raised in surprise. You keep finding new ways to surprise me, Pitt Avery. She winked playfully and dashed off. The sound of running water echoed from the bathroom, and after a few minutes she reappeared, looking like an entirely different person, natural, refreshed, and authentic. Her light brown hair now cascaded in soft waves around her shoulders, and her skin had a healthy, rosy glow. She'd swapped the suggestive outfit for a casual pink lace blouse draped over her skinny jeans. Now that's an improvement, Pitt said with a warm smile. Really? Wasn't I at least a little tempting before? She teased. Oh, absolutely. I'd have to be 6 feet under not to feel something, he admitted, voice dropping. But I'm not interested in Chantel. I want to know Sarah. Her playful expression softened. Pitt Avery, do you always know exactly what to say? They sat down to eat, and Sarah tucked into her food without her usual concern for calories. I forgot how good real bacon tastes, she sighed happily. Afterward, they cleared the table together. As Sarah reached for her suitcase, she hesitated. I guess this is goodbye, she said softly. Pitt stepped in front of the door, arms crossed. My wife paid for you to stay the whole weekend. How about you actually stick around? Sarah frowned, confusion creeping into her expression. But you already said no Zex? Pitt nodded, his tone firm. Yeah, and I meant it. But I'm not about to sit here waiting while she screws that damn doctor. I'd rather spend the weekend with someone worth my time. Sarah hesitated, looking unsure. I can't sleep with you, Pitt. If I did, I'd be no better than her. Pitt gave a small shrug. Who said anything about sleeping together? Let's just talk. There's a stash of board games and playing cards in the closet. We can go for a hike, maybe even swim, unless you forgot to pack a swimsuit. Grinning, Sarah shrugged. Didn't bring one. But you said no Zex. Watching and teasing isn't the same, right? Especially if you're really thinking about leaving her. Pitt nodded. Agreed, Miss Davis. Sarah teased him with a playful smile. Mr. Avery, huh? Or can I just call you Pitt? Please do, Pitt replied. Everyone else does. Curiosity sparked in her eyes. Where'd that name come from anyway? Pitt chuckled. When I was born, my face was all scrunched up like a pit bull. My parents thought it was hilarious. Could have been worse. They might have called me Pug, Sarah laughed. Well, you're definitely not a pit bull now. Who's talking, Sarah or Chantel? Pitt asked, smirking. Chantel's gone. Don't call me that again, she said firmly. Deal. Meanwhile, across town, Patty sat anxiously in her apartment, regret gnawing at her. She'd planned everything, the letter, the escort, every last detail. But now it all felt like a colossal mistake. Dr. Evan Peters had given her $2,000 to set it up, and she'd added her own money to hire someone clean and reputable. The last thing she wanted was to risk bringing an STD into her marriage. Evan was supposed to pick her up around 6. Pitt had texted that morning saying he'd reach the cabin by sunset. Sarah had confirmed she'd arrive shortly after dark. Patty never wanted to jeopardize her marriage, the one thing she truly valued. But Evan had been persuasive. Hire someone for him. If he gets his own fling, he'll forgive yours. It'll even the score, he'd reasoned. It was supposed to be a fleeting indulgence, a momentary lapse before they returned to normal, bought a house, and started a family. Her parents adored Pitt, and his family treated her like their own. Life had been picture perfect until she'd started craving something different. It had all started with a kiss. Dr. Peters had cornered her in a hospital supply room, his lips crashing into hers. She'd tried to pull away at first, but the kiss lingered, forbidden and intoxicating. When he finally broke the kiss, he'd whispered, "You're mine now." Evan arrived precisely on time, dressed casually in jeans and a crisp button-up. Patty had planned to meet him outside, but he pushed past her into the apartment without hesitation, eyes sweeping the room like he owned it. "Not bad for a teacher and a nurse to be," he remarked, running a hand along the countertop. "A little cramped, though." "Evan," Patty said tightly, arms crossing over her chest. "We need to go. I don't want my neighbors seeing you here." He smirked. "Eager to get me into bed already, huh?" "Actually," she muttered, voice tense, "I've been on edge all day. I just want to get this over with." Evan chuckled and stepped closer, invading her space. "That's not how you talk to your weekend lover." "Enough, Evan," Patty snapped. "Let's just go." Patricia, he drawled, shaking his head with mock disappointment. "I shelled out a lot of cash to keep your pathetic husband distracted. The least you can do is act grateful." Her stomach twisted. What had once seemed like an exciting, forbidden thrill now felt like an obligation, and yet that sense of wrongdoing only made her pulse quicken. "Fine," she muttered, hand moving toward his zipper. "Here?" Evan's smug grin widened. "Your husband must be a real pushover for you to do this." Patty's head snapped up, eyes blazing. "Say one more thing about Pitt, and this whole weekend's off!" Evan laughed, unbothered. "Relax, not here, in your bed." Patty froze. "No, anywhere but there." "Not negotiable," he said, arms folding across his chest. "If you're not willing to give me what I want, why should I bother taking you to that fancy resort?" Her fists clenched, but she swallowed her anger. In the end, she gave in. Once inside the bedroom, she turned to find Evan already stripping, his clothes carelessly tossed aside. "What the hell are you doing?" she asked, eyes wide. "Thought you'd want a preview," he smirked, flexing for effect. His tan was flawless, his abs well-defined, but where it counted, unimpressive. Below average, even. Patty's heart sank. This wasn't the fantasy she'd imagined. No romance, no slow caresses, no whispered promises. Just crude, transactional lust. Evan sprawled across the bed, arms behind his head, cocky and expectant. "Well," he drawled. Disgust churned in her gut, but resignation dulled her resistance. She did what he wanted. As he lay there, eyes half-lidded, he sneered, "Bet your husband can't make you feel like this, huh? And the best part? You've got me all to yourself for 3 whole days." That was the breaking point. When it was done, Patty bolted to the bathroom, slamming the door shut behind her. The charming, confident Dr. Peters had morphed into someone unrecognizable. Cold, smug, almost exploitative. She leaned against the sink, forcing deep breaths until the panic subsided. After splashing her face with cold water, she steadied herself and stepped back into the bedroom. Evan was sprawled across the bed, completely undressed, grinning like he owned the place. "Ready for round 2? "We're done," she snapped, grabbing her clothes from the floor. "I warned you. No more trash talk about Pitt." Evan's smirk faltered. He muttered a curse and scrambled to find his jeans. Deep down, he knew he'd pushed too far. Still, he wasn't worried. He'd won her over once. He could do it again. Patty stood in the kitchen, arms wrapped around herself as she gazed blankly out the window. The sky had darkened, and she could only imagine what Pitt was doing at the cabin. Was he in bed with Sarah right now, exploring things they'd never dared try together? The thought gnawed at her, twisting regret deeper into her gut. It was too late to drive to the cottage and undo the damage. Footsteps creaked on the hardwood floor behind her. Evan. "Come on, Patty," he murmured, sliding his hands onto her shoulders. "I didn't mean to upset you. I thought you liked it when I took charge. I'll shut up about your husband, okay? Let's just reset and make this weekend unforgettable." His fingers worked into the knots of her muscles, and despite herself, she leaned into his touch, feeling weak and conflicted. "What the hell am I doing?" she wondered. "I didn't want someone to boss me around," she whispered. "I just wanted to feel wanted, just once." Evan's hands drifted lower, brushing her sides, and her body tensed. In an instant, she saw Pitt's face, saw Sarah. "You've already crossed the line," her mind screamed. "Stop now before it's too late." "No more," she muttered, pulling away. "Not until we get to the resort." Meanwhile, Pitt and Sarah had wandered down the lakeside trail after dinner, their conversation easy and unguarded. When they circled back to the cabin, Sarah kicked off her shoes and began unbuttoning her jeans, eyeing the water with a playful grin. "Turn around," she teased, cheeks flushing. Pitt chuckled. "Seriously? How many guys have seen you undress?" Her face darkened instantly. "Screw you," she snapped, yanking her jeans back up. "I told you, Chantel's gone. I'm Sarah now, only Sarah." Tears welled in her eyes, and before Pitt could apologize, she turned and bolted down the path. He hesitated for only a moment before chasing after her, catching up just as she slowed near the tree line. Gently, he grabbed her shoulder. "Sarah, please, I didn't mean it like that. It was a stupid joke." His voice softened. "I see you, the real you. Chantel's gone, and I'm glad. I want to know you, Sarah." Her breath hitched. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. "Be honest, Pitt. Do you still think I'm dirty? That I'm just someone men pay to—" "Has anyone ever actually paid you for Zex?" he asked quietly, searching her eyes. Her chin quivered. "I told you the truth. You were supposed to be my last job. Even then, I planned to get wasted first just to stomach it. But after meeting you, I couldn't do it. I've met so few good men, Pitt. You're one of them." Pitt extended his hand, his smile gentle. "How about a fresh start? Hi, I'm Pitt. Nice to meet you." Her lips curled into a shy smile as she accepted the handshake. "Sarah, nice to meet you, Pitt." He squeezed her hand lightly. "Let's walk around the lake and talk about anything but our messy lives." And they did. Strolling hand in hand along the shoreline, they swapped stories about childhood, favorite foods, and random quirks. Both loved Elton John and Creedence Clearwater Revival. Both enjoyed cooking, especially Mexican dishes. Laughter echoed across the water as the weight of the weekend momentarily lifted. By the time they returned to the cabin, both were flushed and sweaty from the long walk. "Sarah," Pitt asked, wiping his forehead, "feel like swimming in your underwear?" Her smile widened. "Absolutely." This time he didn't need her to tell him to turn around. He faced the lake, waiting until he heard her soft footsteps behind him. "Think you can catch me?" she teased, splashing into the water. Laughing, Pitt stripped off his shirt and jeans, racing after her. She wore nothing but a tiny pink bra and matching G-string. The thin strip of fabric disappearing between her toned cheeks left little to the imagination. "Holy hell, it's freezing!" she squealed as the water hit her thighs. "Too late to back out now," Pitt called, lunging toward her. Sarah spun just as he tackled her into the lake, both of them hitting the water with a loud splash. They resurfaced, sputtering and laughing, water dripping from their faces. Pitt scooped her up, but she coughed violently, having swallowed a mouthful of water. "Cough it out," he ordered, patting her back until she caught her breath. Finally, she managed to smile, her eyes shining in the moonlight. "I'm fine." Before either could speak, Sarah grabbed Pitt by the collar and kissed him. It was fierce, raw, undeniable. The lake's chill vanished as their bodies pressed together, wet clothes clinging like second skin. In that moment, nothing else existed. No betrayal, no regret. Just the warmth of two people finding comfort in each other. Elsewhere, Evan steered his car toward the resort, smugness radiating from his every word. "Got champagne and flowers in the trunk. Thought you deserved the royal treatment." Patty barely registered his bragging. Her phone buzzed in her lap. "Damn," she thought. "I forgot to leave it at home." She glanced down, half expecting Pitt's name, but it was just another spam call. Exhaling in relief, she powered the phone off completely. The last thing she wanted was Pitt tracking her location through the Find My Phone app. As Evan whistled along with the radio, Patty leaned her head back and closed her eyes. But peace didn't come. Her mind betrayed her, painting vivid images of Pitt tangled in the sheets with a beautiful woman. God, what have I done? A tear slipped down her cheek as a lyric from an old song echoed in her mind. It's too late to turn back now. Evan pulled into the resort's circular driveway, whistling as he parked. Here we are, gorgeous. Noticing her wiping her eyes, he frowned. Hey, what's with the waterworks? Patty swallowed hard, voice trembling. Evan, I can't do this. I'm sorry. His confident smirk faded. What? I'll pay you back, every cent. You hired Sarah to keep Pitt distracted, but I can't be that person. Not anymore. Are you kidding me? Evan muttered, gripping the steering wheel tightly. After a long pause, he let out a forced laugh and leaned back. You know it's too late, right? Pitt knows you're here with me. Whether he sleeps with her or just stews in anger, the damage is done. You've already crossed the line. Good luck explaining that when you go home. Patty stared at him, uncertainty clouding her face. Promise me you won't push. No threats, no blackmail. Just let me go. Evan held up his hands. Scout's honor. If you want to head home tomorrow, I'll drive you myself. Her shoulders sagged in relief. No anger? No threats to tell the hospital staff? Jesus, no. The last thing I need is my wife hearing about this. Patty nodded slowly. Okay, I'll stay tonight. Tomorrow, I'll decide if I'm staying the whole weekend, but nothing else happens, understood? Deal, Evan agreed easily, though the exploitative glint in his eyes betrayed his true thoughts. For the first time, though, a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. Maybe this wasn't such a brilliant idea after all. Back at the lake, Sarah broke the kiss, laughing breathlessly as she darted toward the cabin, throwing a playful glance over her shoulder. You coming, slowpoke? She teased, curling her finger to beckon Pitt forward. As she stole a quick glance down, her cheeks flushed. The outline of his arousal, barely concealed by his soaked boxers, left little to the imagination. Patty wasn't exaggerating, she thought, heat rising to her face. Damn. For all the men Sarah had encountered, none had ever left her feeling quite like this. It wasn't just the physical attraction, though that was undeniable. It was Pitt's kindness, his easy humor, the way he listened without judgment. Her heart raced, and for once it wasn't driven by obligation or survival. This was different, real. Pitt, meanwhile, couldn't tear his eyes away from the gentle sway of her hips and the delicate pink G-string hugging her curves. She was stunning, not just in the polished way she'd presented herself as Chantel, but raw, unfiltered, and undeniably herself. Yet, a flicker of hesitation cooled his excitement. Could I really fall for someone who's lived that life? The thought barely formed before it vanished. Whatever her past, this moment was genuine. Inside the cabin, Pitt stirred the fireplace to life while Sarah fetched towels. When he turned around, his breath caught. She stood completely bare, holding out a fluffy white towel with a mischievous smile. Dry me off, she purred, eyes gleaming. And I'll return the favor. His hands trembled as he swept the towel over her damp shoulders, lingering along her arms. She sighed, eyes fluttering shut. That feels incredible. For the first time, Sarah wasn't performing. There was no facade, no transaction, just her, completely vulnerable, heart pounding for reasons she hadn't expected. Pitt's touch slowed as he moved down her back, pausing at the curve of her hips. You're still soaked, he murmured, sliding his fingers beneath the towel, brushing the underside of her firm backside. Her breath hitched. Pitt, she whispered, turning to face him, lips hovering inches from his. Please. Sarah had spent years giving pleasure without ever truly receiving it. It had always been mechanical, professional. But this was different, and she didn't want it to end. Pitt leaned in, eyes closing as their lips met once more. In that instant, Sarah knew. He wasn't like the others. He saw her, not Chantel, not an escort, just Sarah. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt whole. Meanwhile, across town, Patty and Evan returned from dinner, the resort's warm lights glowing softly as they stepped inside. Patty flipped her phone back on, half expecting a message from Pitt. Nothing. Evan smirked, slipping behind her to rub her shoulders. No news, huh? Looks like your boy's enjoying his gift. Chantel's got a knack for charming just about anyone. Patty stiffened. Have you ever, been with her? Evan chuckled. Nah, and from what I've heard, she's never actually slept with anyone she knows. Her reputation's built on other talents. Hands only, no kissing, no closeness. She keeps it clinical. Patty's eyes narrowed. Wait, are you saying this might be her first time actually having sex with a client? That's the word around the hospital. Evan shrugged. Honestly, if I didn't know her line of work, I'd have thought she was just another college girl. A cold knot formed in Patty's stomach. Oh God, this is exactly what I didn't want. What if Pitt falls for her? Evan's hands drifted downward, brushing the curve of her chests. She gasped and shoved his hands away, spinning to face him. I want to go home, she blurted out, panic rising. Evan raised an eyebrow. Home? You're kidding, right? After everything? Look. He grabbed her hand, pressing it against his obvious arousal. The damage is done, babe. Pitt's either screwing her senseless or stewing in rage. Why not enjoy the ride while we figure out how you're going to fix things with him? Patty hesitated, torn between guilt and desire. I need to call him. If he hasn't done anything, I can explain. Tell him I backed out, that it was a mistake. He'll forgive me. He loves me enough to understand. Evan's easy smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Sure, Patty. I'm sure it'll all be that simple. Her resolve weakened. When Evan pulled her closer, she didn't resist. God, what am I doing? I'm taking a shower, she muttered, backing toward the bathroom. Want to join me? Absolutely, Evan replied without hesitation. He knew the game. Keep her distracted. Keep her warm. Eventually, she'd forget why she wanted to leave in the first place. Back at the cabin, Sarah lay in Pitt's arms, listening to the crackling fire and the rhythmic beat of his heart. How did I get this lucky? She wondered, tracing her fingertips down his side. One night with a man who treated her like a person, not a product, and she was already falling harder than she'd ever thought possible. Pitt stirred, murmuring something unintelligible. When his eyes fluttered open, they widened in surprise. Blonde hair bobbed just below his navel, teasing and tempting. Not a dream. Sarah. They lost themselves in each other once more before reluctantly packing their bags. Reality was creeping back in, no matter how much they wished otherwise. As Pitt tightened the strap on his duffel, he glanced at Sarah, a thoughtful smile playing on his lips. You know, he began slowly, Patty's not supposed to be back until tomorrow afternoon. Once I freeze a few accounts and cancel some credit cards, maybe we could grab a room in the city, just us. Sarah's grin was immediate. I was hoping you'd suggest that. I want to know you, Pitt continued, lacing his fingers with hers. Not the woman you pretended to be. The real you. My place might not be ideal, though. My roommate's gone for a while. Why not stay with me? I don't think you want to be around when this whole mess blows up. Sarah hesitated. I don't want to impose. Pitt squeezed her hand, his gaze steady. Trust me, you'd be anything but a burden. Let's figure this out together. Without further discussion, they tossed their bags into the trunk and headed down the winding forest road. The crisp Saturday morning air flowed through the open windows as they drove, the conversation light and effortless. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah felt calm. Life, for once, didn't feel like a business arrangement. By the time they reached Pitt's townhouse, Sarah realized something had shifted. She no longer felt the need to watch him for signs of hesitation. He was done with Patty, completely and irrevocably. Pitt pulled into the garage and led her through the side door into the condo. Honey, I'm home, he called out mockingly. Let's hope she doesn't answer, Sarah muttered, unimpressed by the joke. While Pitt disappeared into his office, focused on unraveling the financial ties that bound him to Patty, Sarah wandered through the house. Her eyes landed on a framed wedding photo above the fireplace, a radiant bride and groom, grinning under a cloudless sky. That could have been me, she thought, imagining herself in Patty's place. Why would she risk this for a fleeting thrill with some self-important doctor? Pitt's voice murmured in her ear, his breath warm against her skin. Take anything you like, he said, his tone low. But first, I want one thing. Sarah shivered, her pulse quickening. What's that? She asked softly. Pitt leaned in closer. To make love to you, in our bed. Her heart skipped. I thought we agreed. No sex. Pitt nodded slowly. Right, no sex, just a parting gift, something to remind her what she threw away. Sarah's breath caught. She knew exactly what he meant, and strangely, the thought thrilled her. A farewell, she murmured, a wicked smile tugging at her lips. And maybe a promise of what's to come. Why don't you get comfortable? Pitt suggested, nodding toward the open closet. Pick out something fitting. How about one of these negligees? It felt surreal, lying on the same bed where he'd once shared dreams with another woman. But as Pitt undressed, the weight of his failing marriage seemed to dissolve, replaced by simmering determination. The sadness he'd once felt had been eclipsed by something sharper, resentment, clarity. She threw all this away, he thought bitterly. For what? A weekend with some smooth-talking doctor? The soft creak of the closet door pulled him from his thoughts. Sarah emerged, draped in a delicate nightgown, the very one Patty had worn on their wedding night. Perfect, Pitt murmured, his voice thick with emotion. What followed wasn't rushed or reckless. Their movements were slow, deliberate. Each kiss lingered. Each touch spoke volumes. This wasn't about lust. It was about connection. Something deeper, more meaningful. They didn't cross the final line, but it didn't matter. What they shared was more intimate than sex. Afterward, the evidence of their passion stained the middle of the bed, a literal and symbolic reminder of what Patty had sacrificed. Silently, they stripped the sheets, replaced them with fresh linens, and stood side by side, quietly acknowledging the shift that had occurred between them. Pitt moved through the house like a man with purpose, every framed photo, every memento of his marriage, into the trash. The wedding album, tossed without hesitation. In the nightstand drawer, he found the diamond engagement ring he'd given Patty, a family heirloom passed down from his grandmother. He slipped it into his pocket without a second thought. But his own wedding band? That he left behind. No note, no explanation, just silence. Across town, Patty sat stiffly on the couch in the resort suite, arms wrapped around herself. She'd refused Evan's touch after dinner, guilt gnawing at her insides. He'd tried to coax her into bed, promising they could just talk, but her mind was elsewhere. On Pitt, on the mess she'd made. She wasn't enjoying herself anymore, just going through the motions like someone stuck in a nightmare they couldn't wake from. By noon on Sunday, Evan pulled up outside her apartment. Patty's eyes darted around the parking lot, heart pounding. "Do you see his car?" she asked, voice tight. Evan leaned back, glancing around casually. "Nope. Guess he spent the night with her." His lips curled into a smug grin. Good for him. Patty closed her eyes, a wave of relief washing over her. "I'm sorry I ruined our weekend," she murmured, reaching for Evan's hand. "I love my husband too much to ever do something like this again." Evan squeezed her fingers, his expression softening. "I get it. I feel the same. I'll never cheat on my wife again either." It was an easy lie, spoken without a trace of guilt. Truth be told, his only concern was avoiding suspicion. Patty pulled her hand away and climbed out of the car, her goodbye nothing more than a nod toward the front door. That's it then. Time to rebuild my marriage and start the family we always talked about. If only she knew. Inside, Patty moved with purpose, heading straight for the laundry room. She stripped off her clothes, tossing them into the washing machine, determined to erase every trace of her mistake. In her single-minded focus, she missed the telltale signs. Pitt's travel bag in the hallway, the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume, the damp footprints on the bathroom tiles. Only when she reached for something in the nightstand did reality crash down. There, where her own wedding ring usually sat, was Pitt's band, neatly placed, deliberate, like a final word spoken without sound. Across town, Pitt and Sarah sat together on the couch, her head resting against his chest, his arm draped protectively around her shoulders. "You don't have to stick around," Pitt murmured, squeezing her hand. "I can grab a hotel for a few days, figure things out." Sarah lifted her gaze, eyes soft but steady. "You don't have to be alone, and, honestly, I want to be here. Crazy as it sounds, it feels like I've known you forever." A smile tugged at Pitt's lips. He brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering. "You showed up when I needed light the most. I don't know how to thank you for that." Sarah hesitated, brows knitting together. "But what about the money? The payment for the weekend? I was thinking, maybe I should return it." "I'll cover whatever you owe," Pitt said firmly. "You didn't have to stay, but you did. That means more than you'll ever know." Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She glanced at the screen, color draining from her face. "She's home," she whispered. Pitt's jaw tightened. "Aren't you going to answer?" Sarah locked the screen without hesitation. "No, I'm done talking to her." Moments later, Pitt's phone buzzed again. This time it was a voicemail. Without hesitation, he swiped left and deleted it, not bothering to listen. Across town, Patty sat on the couch, phone in hand, panic tightening her throat. She was running out of options. If there was any hope of salvaging her marriage, she'd have to lie. Swallowing her pride, she dialed Pitt's number once more. When the call went to voicemail, she took a shaky breath and left a message, voice trembling with desperation. "Pitt, baby, please don't shut me out. I know you're furious, but I need you to hear me out. Nothing happened with Dr. Evan. We flirted, kissed, maybe crossed a line, but I stopped it before it went further. I realized how stupid I was, how much I was risking. And no matter what happened between you and that escort, I forgive you. We can move past this." She paused, wiping away fresh tears before continuing. "I came home today and found your engagement ring. And Pitt, I saw my honeymoon nightgown on the floor of the closet. Please, please tell me you didn't let her wear it. That gown symbolized the beginning of our marriage. It was supposed to be sacred. I don't know where you are, but come home. I love you. I've always loved you. Forever yours, Patty." Exhausted, she ended the call and dropped the phone onto the coffee table. Every moment with Evan had been a mistake, a fleeting temptation that had cost her everything. Hoping sleep might clear her head, Patty trudged into the bedroom and pulled back the covers. Her breath caught. A dark, unmistakable stain spread across the center of the mattress. The sharp, musky scent hit her, and bile rose in her throat. "You son of a witch!" she shrieked, stumbling backward. Gagging, she sprinted to the bathroom and emptied her stomach into the toilet. Tears blurred her vision as she clung to the sink for support. How could he? She'd sworn she'd never let another man defile their bed. Yet Pitt, her husband, had done it without a second thought. Numb and broken, Patty grabbed a blanket from the linen closet and curled up on the living room sofa. When she woke, the room was dark, the soft glow from the porch light casting faint shadows across the walls. Groggy, she reached for her phone. Still nothing from Pitt, just one message from Evan. "Well, did he blow up or walk away? Should I be worried?" Scowling, she called him back. As soon as he answered, she blurted, "He was here, Evan. He left his wedding ring. Brace yourself, he's about to go nuclear." "Crap," Evan muttered. "If he goes public, we're screwed. Our jobs, our reputations, gone." Patty's voice dropped to a whisper. "Do you think he actually brought Chantel here? Had Zex with her in our bed? He tossed our wedding photos in the trash. God, I hope that was the end of it. But knowing Pitt, he's not done." Evan sighed. "Stick to the story. I already told my wife nothing happened. You should probably do the same." After hanging up, Evan sat on his back porch, watching his young son chase fireflies across the lawn. He'd been so confident this plan would work, that Pitt would indulge, forgive, and move on. But he'd misjudged the man entirely. The next morning, dread settled in Patty's chest like a stone. With shaking fingers, she called Pitt's parents, hoping they'd heard from him. No luck. In fact, they sounded surprised that she didn't know his whereabouts. Heart racing, she tried her brother next. "Mike, please tell me Pitt called you." "Patty? No, I haven't heard a word. Why? What's going on?" But she didn't answer. She hung up before he could press further. Later that afternoon, while picking up groceries, her credit card was declined. Flustered, she tried another. Same result. The cashier offered a sympathetic smile while Patty stood frozen, realization dawning. He froze the accounts. Her breath came in shallow gasps. Pitt was cutting her off completely. No money, no communication. He'd vanished, leaving her to unravel alone. Desperate, she made one last call to Roger, the dean of Pitt's department. He was an old family friend, someone who might know where Pitt had gone. "Roger, it's Patty," she began, voice strained. "Have you heard from Pitt? I'm really worried." A heavy silence followed. When Roger finally spoke, his tone was careful, almost guarded. "Patty, I'd rather not get involved, but he did ask for some personal leave. Said he needed time to sort things out. He sounded calm, but not himself. That's all I know. Take care." "Wait!" Patty cried, but the line had already gone dead. That afternoon, Pitt leaned back on the couch, stretching out his legs as Sarah nestled beside him. "Got a week off," he said with a tired smile. "Figured I'd use it to clear my head, figure out what's next." Sarah traced lazy circles on his chest. "So what's the plan? Hide out here?" Pitt chuckled. "Nah. How about dinner at Silver's Steakhouse tonight? I could use a good steak." She hesitated. "Are you sure you want to be seen? What if someone recognizes you?" "Let them," Pitt said firmly. "I'm done hiding." Sarah grinned, mischief dancing in her eyes. In that case, why don't I wear one of those fancy dresses from your wife's closet? If we're making a statement, might as well make it loud. Pitt laughed. Deal. Sure enough, the moment they stepped into Silver's, Pitt spotted a familiar face. Darlene, one of Patty's co-workers, stood near the hostess stand, waiting for a table. Her gaze swept over Pitt, then lingered on Sarah, her slim figure wrapped in Patty's striking red cocktail dress. For a brief moment, Pitt considered turning around, avoiding the scene entirely, but then he squared his shoulders. If the gossip was inevitable, why not fuel it? Darlene's eyes widened in disbelief. Oh my God! Pitt smiled coolly. Hey, Darlene, how's David these days? Her confident facade faltered. David was her husband, but the man standing beside her was definitely not him. He's in Europe for work, she stammered. Oh, and this is Jack. He's new at the hospital. Pitt's smile sharpened. Started around the same time as Dr. Evan, right? Darlene flushed while Jack chuckled. Seems like we're all part of the same package deal. Jack extended a hand. How do you two know each other? Before Pitt could answer, Darlene tugged Jack's arm. Our table's ready. See you around, Pitt. As they hurried away, Sarah leaned closer, her eyes twinkling. Looks like Patty and Evan's little secret isn't so secret anymore. Across town, Patty sat on her parents' couch, eyes red and swollen. They'd called after speaking to Pitt's mom and dad, who were equally in the dark. Everyone was worried now. An hour later, Patty's phone buzzed. Hope surged, only to crash when she saw the caller ID. Darlene. Patty! Darlene's voice practically sparkled with excitement. How was your weekend? Patty sighed, slumping deeper into the couch. Awful, Dare. I tried to stop everything, but it was too late. The whole thing was underwhelming, honestly. Not nearly as mind-blowing as I'd imagined. How's it going with Jack? Funny you should ask, Darlene chuckled. Tonight's supposed to be our first time, but that's not why I'm calling. Pitt just walked into Silver's, arm in arm with the stunning blonde. Patty's heart stopped. No way. It's got to be the same escort Evan and I hired. Pitt kept his wedding ring, froze our bank accounts, and now he's parading her around? Why the hell did I let Evan talk me into picking someone that attractive? Darlene sighed. If he's not answering your calls, I'm coming over. Be there in 15. Back at Silver's, Sarah leaned in close, voice hushed. That woman's still staring, she whispered, eyes darting toward Darlene. She's on the phone now. I'd bet she's calling your wife. Don't call her that, Pitt muttered, jaw tightening. My wife died the moment I read that letter. Love doesn't come with conditions. Trying to lighten the mood, he smirked. So, Sarah, meet anyone interesting lately? Maybe, she teased, her lips curling into a playful smile. He seems sweet, solid guy. Decent in bed, too. Decent, mind you. Nothing to write home about. Pitt chuckled. Well, the game's not over yet. I'm aiming for a royal flush. Sarah giggled, reaching across the table to lace her fingers with his. They were lost in each other when the scream shattered the restaurant's quiet hum. Get your hands off my husband, you hooker, and take off my damn dress! Both froze, stunned. Neither had noticed Patty storming across the floor, fury etched into every line of her face. Before Sarah could react, Patty's hand shot out, aiming for her cheek. Pitt moved fast, catching Patty's wrist mid-swing and twisting it behind her back. Not enough to hurt, just enough to stop her. Enough, he growled. You're making a scene. The entire restaurant fell silent. Diners stared, forks frozen halfway to their mouths, conversations forgotten. Patty's face paled, her knees buckled, and her eyes rolled back. Pitt barely caught her before she hit the floor. Darlene, he shouted, she's out cold. Darlene was already moving. I'm a nurse. Everyone, give us space. She knelt beside Patty, fingers pressing to her neck. Pulse is racing. Get me some water and a clean towel. The bartender sprinted over with a damp cloth, pressing it gently to Patty's forehead. After a few tense moments, her eyes fluttered open. Dazed, she glanced around until her gaze locked onto Pitt. Pitt, baby, I'm here, she slurred, fumbling in her pocket. With trembling fingers, she pulled out his wedding ring. See? I have it. This was all a misunderstanding. Evan and I didn't sleep together. We kissed, sure, touched a little. But I stopped it. Please, believe me. Pitt's expression hardened. But it's fine to hire an escort to seduce me? Make it make sense, Patty. Her face twisted with rage. She spun towards Sarah, eyes blazing. Her name's not Sarah, it's Chantel, and she's nothing but a filthy hoe. Before anyone could intervene, Patty snatched a water glass from the table and hurled it. Pitt moved instinctively, stepping in front of Sarah. The glass struck his shoulder with a dull thud, water splashing across his chest as the glass hit the floor and shattered. Ah! Pitt winced, rubbing his shoulder. The impact had been harder than it looked. His glare cut through Patty like a knife. You've completely lost it. Turning to Sarah, he muttered, We're leaving. Nearby, Sean, the restaurant manager, stood holding his phone, recording still active. Got the whole thing on video, Pitt. Want me to send it to you? Do it, Pitt replied without hesitation. You've got my number, right? Sean nodded. Yep. Want me to call the cops? The administrator, standing near the host stand, chimed in. Already done. I called when she passed out. A young female paramedic pushed through the crowd, medical bag in hand. What happened here? Darlene glanced up, still holding Patty's wrist. She fainted. Her pulse is elevated, and I think she hit her elbow when she fell. Maybe bumped her head, too. The paramedic nodded and began checking Patty's vitals. Meanwhile, her partner approached Pitt, eyeing the way he cradled his left arm. Sir, you should get that checked, the paramedic advised. Could be a hairline fracture or a bruised collarbone. Tears welled in Patty's eyes. Pitt, please. I didn't mean to kick you. Just come home. We can fix this. Forget the whole weekend ever happened. Pitt's expression didn't soften. I think you've done more than enough damage for one lifetime. You've got until tomorrow night to pack your things and get out. Call a lawyer. We're done. Rattled, Darlene stepped outside and dialed Mike, Patty's brother. Mike, you need to get down here. Your sister's a wreck, and she's refusing medical help. You know how fast gossip spreads. 10 minutes later, Mike burst into the restaurant, but Pitt and Sarah were already gone. What the hell happened? He demanded, eyes narrowing at his sister, who still sat slumped on the floor. Patty wiped at her tear-streaked face. Oh, God, Mike. Pitt just left with the escort I hired. I shot him with a glass. Now he says it's over. Mike blinked, dumbfounded. What? You're not making any sense. The paramedic stood, stowing her stethoscope. Honestly, ma'am, there's no sign of a concussion. Just some bruising on the arm. Nothing serious. Do you feel pain anywhere else? Just my heart, Patty whispered, voice hollow. I lost the only man I've ever truly loved. For Pitt, that night was the final nail in the coffin. After the restaurant debacle, he wasted no time filing a restraining order. Patty initially fought it, but when Pitt threatened to expose the damning letter and the messages detailing the escort setup, she folded. There was no more hiding the truth. Patty and Dr. Evan had orchestrated the entire fiasco, all so they could indulge in their affair guilt-free. The infidelity charge stuck like glue. Pitt had all the proof he needed, while Patty had nothing but empty excuses. Sarah, wanting no part in the drama, returned every cent she'd been paid for her so-called escort job. That single gesture tipped the scales in Pitt's favor, leading the judge to grant him a 70/30th split of assets while denying Patty any claim to alimony. Justice, it seemed, had finally caught up with her. Karma didn't spare Dr. Evan either. This wasn't his first time cheating, and his wife had reached her breaking point. She filed for divorce, walking away with the bulk of their assets while Evan was left with little more than his bruised ego and the graveyard shift at a local pharmacy. From respected physician to counting pills under flickering fluorescent lights. It was a humiliating fall from grace. Patty didn't fare much better. The divorce, coupled with the hit to her reputation, sent her into a downward spiral. It took more than a year for her to accept the brutal truth. Her marriage to Pitt was truly over. Every time she heard footsteps near her door, she glanced up, half expecting Pitt to walk in, ready to forgive her. But he never came. Eventually, she tried dating again, but no one ever measured up to the man she'd betrayed. Her deepest regret? Hiring an escort who'd not only exposed her lies, but captured Pitt's heart in the process. Years later, Patty found herself retired in the Villages, Florida, where she became a local bingo champion, filling her nights with numbers and bittersweet memories. Life moved on, though not in the way she'd once imagined. Meanwhile, Sarah had quietly rebuilt her life. Graduating with honors, she left the scandal behind and relocated to North Carolina, far from the judgmental whispers and lingering stares. Sharing an apartment with another engineering grad, she threw herself into her career, often working late and keeping her personal life under tight lock and key. Romance? That felt like a luxury she neither wanted nor trusted anymore. But fate, as always, had other plans. It was a rainy Thursday evening when a knock sounded at her apartment door. Expecting a neighbor, Sarah opened it without thinking, and froze. There stood Pitt, grinning like he'd hit the jackpot, holding an enormous bouquet of pink roses. A small card peeked from the blooms. Her name etched in bold, elegant script, Sarah. Her breath caught. Oh my God, what? Why? I don't understand. Pitt's smile widened, the years of waiting etched into the crinkles at the corners of his eyes. After the divorce was finalized, he'd quietly hired a private investigator. Not to stalk her, but to make sure she was okay. He needed to know if she'd truly left her old life behind, if she was safe, happy, whole. What he discovered surprised him. Sarah had buried herself in work, rarely dated, and had long since abandoned anything remotely tied to her past. She'd grown, evolved, and in his eyes, become even more remarkable. He hadn't rushed. Pitt refused to approach her until he was completely free, legally, emotionally, spiritually. Other women had tried to fill the void Patty left behind, but none compared to Sarah. She was the one who had stood by him when his world fell apart, the one who'd never lied, even when the truth cost her everything. In the end, it had always been her. Taking a steady breath, Pitt spoke softly. Evening, ma'am. My name's Pitt, and I've been hoping to meet you for quite some time. Sarah blinked, heart racing, but her playful side kicked in. How do you know my name, stranger? And how'd you find me? Is this some kind of late April fool's prank? Her words were teasing, but her body betrayed her, every nerve screaming to close the distance between them. Pitt chuckled, extending the bouquet toward her. Funny story. I was driving through Kentucky, stopped for gas at this tiny roadside station. The old guy behind the counter looked like he'd been there since the dawn of time. I asked if he knew a blonde named Davis, a girl whose dad worked the mines and whose mom did laundry to make ends meet. Sarah's eyes widened, lips parting in surprise. Pitt smiled, stepping closer. The old man scratched his head and said, Well, my brother, Sam Davis, is a retired miner, and his daughter-in-law runs the laundromat down the street. You must mean my niece, Sarah Sue. She's some big-shot engineer now, living in North Carolina. Why you asking? Pitt's voice softened. I told him I needed to ask his brother a very important question. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she laughed, wiping them away with the back of her hand. Oh, God, should I warn Uncle Sam to get his rifle ready? Pitt grinned. No need for that. He already gave me his blessing. Her smile faltered, breath catching in her throat. Wait, what? I talked to your dad, Sarah, Pitt whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I told him everything, about us, about what you meant to me then and what you mean to me now. I asked for his blessing because I wanted to do this the right way. The bouquet trembled in Sarah's hands as the truth sank in. You actually spoke to my dad? Pitt nodded, heart pounding. Because if you'll have me, I'm not letting you go this time. For the first time in years, Sarah allowed herself to believe in happiness again. No more walls, no more fear, just the man who'd seen her at her worst and still chose her. Tears spilling down her cheeks, she smiled through the sob. Yes, she whispered. My answer is yes.